Hi folks, it's Brendan from Navigate World Whisky. We're going to focus on oak for 2 episodes. 1 episode each for the 2 dominant types of wood that characterize maturation of spirit. Now, we know spirit gets a lot of its color and a fair bit of its flavor as well from the wood that it is matured inside barrels or what are known as casks. I think it's worth diving deep into the subject and finding out a bit more about wood and oak in particular that imparts so much to the world of spirits that we love. In this episode, we're focusing on American white oak, also known as Quercus alba by scientific name. Let's get stuck in. So what do we know about American white oak? Well, generally it imparts vanillins, sweetness, caramels, often comparatively less spicy perhaps than its French oak counterpart. With American white oak, the bourbon production industry is a massive producer of barrels. So bourbon by law has to be aged in American white oak, virgin American white oak, that is barrels that have not been filled with spirit before. And in its second use often gets taken up by the Scotch industry. But Scotch will also use virgin oak from time to time. Let's wind things back though. Let's go right back to the forest to understand where white oak comes from, how it's processed into barrels, and how it is able to impart such amazing flavor into spirits for us. So we're going to borrow heavily from the excellent video by Waterford Distillery and join Ned from Waterford as he wanders around an American oak forest with some experts. Check it out.
The forest. The white oak grows over quite a big geographical range in the eastern U.S. It has good timber value. It's also valuable for wildlife. Its acorns are highly valued by wildlife.
Little fawn, black bear.
Recently?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, we're going this way.
Of course, the American white oak has different chemicals in it than like French oak does, for example. Vanilla being one of them, right? Ultimately, So you have different flavor profiling, and physically the wood's a little different, allowing for us to be able to machine the staves out and the barrels out pretty easily. Mature trees of this size are somewhere between 80 and 120 years old.
Okay.
This forest regenerated, and all the trees that you're seeing here, particularly the large overstory trees, are basically the same age, so they all grew up together. That competition is what allowed these trees to, because of the tight spacing, to shed their branches and create very clear wood for, in some cases, 30, 40, 50 foot up the stem. Now this particular tree here that we're looking at, it has the ability to produce quite probably a number of stave logs taken out of here. As you move up the tree, at some point you start to see the branching up there and that kind of thing. At that point it's not usable for stave logs because the knots that would be in the wood that would leak.
Right, so there we saw the importance of stem length in those 100-plus-year-old trees to produce logs for efficient stave production. Now we need to find out how they get staves out of these logs. Let's cut to the stave mill and join Ned again from Waterford as we understand how they go about chopping that wood into staves useful for barrel making.
This is a debarker. You have a rotating head. That's the first process. The logs come in and we cut them to length. Roughly our usage is about 55%. I said a stave has to be a pretty good piece of wood.
Yes, yeah.
They can't have any sap.
So that can't be used because the liquid will just go through that.
Right. See this ring in here? Depending on what it looks like, we may lose all that. All staves have to be quarter sawed. So in other words, the first cut will be right down the middle. The second cut will be the quarter. Take a piece off this way, which keeps the grain straight.
Yeah.
And then your next piece, and your next piece, and your next piece. If the grain turns over a 45-degree angle, it will possibly split when it's bent. I know that French oak is not as uniform as a white oak. French oak, I've looked at it and I'm going, I see why they have to split it. It's because it's so crazy grain.
Right, so there, very interesting. We learnt due to American white oak's favourable structural properties compared with, say, French oak, they're able to get about 55% yield out of the logs for stave making, for suitable staves for barrels. So now you have staves. How do we make barrels? Well, that's done in a cooperage. Let's cut to the coopers and the cooperage and see how they get it done.
Each cask has a different amount of stave.
Yeah, completely. No doubt about it. We're separating. We got whites, narrows, and mediums. So in every barrel, we're going to follow a rough sequence. We want a mix of all of those in every barrel. We have to get the wood hot and wet, so we can bend it without breaking it. We spray it down with water and let it dry. So here we're planing top and bottom. Got a nice flat joint here. So now we'll bring it over here. So this is drilling and doweling, and then he's laying it out here. And now we're going to cut the circle out, and all these offcuts fuel for the fire. Here we do the air water pressure test, and then we'll brand it.
Okay, so now we have a barrel, but those wonderful vanillins and spices and nutty sweet notes have not yet been developed in the wood. I can pick up a lot of those in this incredible little dram. I'm actually enjoying a single farm origin Knockrow from Waterford. This is the South African exclusive. And here, amazing sort of creme patisserie, vanillins, incredible flavors coming out of the wood. Let's go back to the toasting and charring process to understand how these flavors are coaxed out of wood to benefit wonderful spirits like these.
Toasting, radiant heat, non-direct flame contact. Charring, direct flame contact, you're actually creating carbon and burning the wood itself. From the aging side, they do two very different things, and a lot of people don't understand that the toasting is so critical because it's actually an additive. It's adding flavors, vanillas, butterscotches, sweet flavors. The char really more takes away. It adds color, but aside from the color, it's acting as a filter and actually taking off flavors out.
You get to a point where, it's a heavy toast or it's a light char. It's a fine line, but there is an understanding, I think, that the barrel should ignite.
Magic to it all is the toast. Yeah. It's hidden underneath the char. No one really knows about it, but we think that's what makes the big difference.
If we were to char for a very long time, you could probably lose that toast layer, and you might lose some of the nice kind of the middle palate stuff.
Okay, wow, just imagine those smells in that toasting warehouse. It's really fascinating to learn that it's the slower, lower temperature toasting process that really develops the sugars, the caramels, really exposes the vanillins, can bring all sorts of nutty, buttery, spicy notes. And the char is more, he described it as the removing layer rather than the additive layer. So the carbon in the char acts as a carbon filter and can actually remove unwanted compounds from the spirit like sulfurs. But for me, a lot of that barrel making you saw, the purpose of those barrels would have been for bourbon. And that charry note can also, be additive in terms of flavor. It can give you some kind of charred, ashy notes that balance out all the sweetness and richness in the bourbon. We can see here bourbon entirely virgin, charred oak, a lot of color in a 10-year age statement. A very active barrel. Nothing has drawn any color or flavor out of it before. It's a virgin barrel necessarily for bourbon, compared with a second fill Scotch whiskey. Admittedly, this is quite a young whiskey, but a much slower extraction because, that maturation process, which involves some virgin oak, also has quite a large proportion of second fill. So in the bourbon maturation process, virgin oak, heavily toasted, heavily charred. What am I picking up here? Sweet Christmas cake spices. There's that sort of ashy charred note that is balancing all these kind of desserty sweet spices. Roasted nuts. This is definitely We're definitely smelling very well toasted oak here, I would suggest. Compared with, say, second fill with a mix of barrels, oh, so much more delicate, vanillins, creme patisserie. And the amazing thing with Waterford, you know, they have one of the most expensive barrel programs or wood policies in the world, as they describe it. If you punch their terroir code, you can find out exactly how each bottle was aged in terms of the breakdown of barrels it went into and the types of wood it went into. Fascinating stuff, and really helps you understand the spirit you're drinking. Well, I hope that shed some light on American oak and barrel making in general. The next episode we're going to deal with French oak, very similar production processes, slight differences in how they prepare the wood for maturation, and certainly quite big differences in the wood itself and how they have to handle it. So check it out. Cheers.